Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I love introducing you to people who are committed to working on their own development and to helping others become the best versions of themselves. That's also a key focus of my company, Grow Strong Leaders. We publish software tools and books for improving the way people connect with each other at work, and you can learn more at growstrongleaders.com. Today, I am really excited to introduce you to my guest, Marcel Daane. Marcel, welcome to my show.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. How exciting.
Well, I am very excited, and as people hear us get into our conversation, they will be too. Marcel is the CEO of Level 5 Partners, a global network of uniquely trained executive coaches working with multinational organizations, teams, and leaders. He's considered one of the world's authorities in mind-body leadership, a combination of mindfulness and body awareness. In 2020, he was voted Executive Coach of the Year by Singapore Prestige Brands. And in 2016, he was awarded the Global Coaching Leadership Award. And today, we're going to focus on Marcel's book, and I think you'll love the title, 5 Energies of Horrible Bosses and How Not to Become One. So, Marcel, this is such an intriguing book. Before we jump into it, and there's so much I want to cover with you about it. It was an excellent book. I highly recommend all of my listeners get a copy of it. Tell us first about your journey to doing the work you're doing today with leaders and teams.
Yeah, it's it's a long journey. I'm 56, so I'm getting on with age, and it's been a while. But an interesting thing, that I always share, especially with my clients as well, is I don't actually come from a corporate background. And I'm a lifelong martial artist, and I started my career in the military actually for 10 years or so before I ended up becoming a personal trainer, helping people. And it was actually the work that I was doing as a personal trainer that inspired me to want to find ways to help people better. And I ended up just evolving as, from a trainer to a coach to a wellness coach, and then ended up working with corporates in the corporate space, and ended up evolving into kind of that leadership space that I've been in now for the past 12 years or so. But I think what's important for me is how I like to help my clients and I think one of the reasons why I have such a great impact on them is because I have a tendency to see the world through a different lens than a lot of other people do. And it actually comes from a history of mental illness. I struggled with mental illness when I was a young adult. I also had a stint as an alcoholic, abusing drugs. And, so I come from a very, different eclectic background. And I had to learn over the years that my brain was just wired differently than the average other person's. And for many years, I thought that was a curse. I really, I did not like the way that, that I had difficulty fitting into the standard norms, right, of how a person, especially from my generation, would normally kind of grow up and evolve into some form of corporate life and develop a career and white picket fence. And I had none of that. I was in a very different space. But over the decades, as I matured and evolved myself, and as I learned and studied, and I ended up pursuing a master's degree in neuroscience just to figure out my own brain, because it was so weirdly different from everybody else's. But what I learned from that is that because my brain works differently, it also makes me very unique. And that unique perspective that I have, very often I'll sit on the other side of the table with a leader, and they'll be telling me, their challenges, whatever's going on, what they have to work on. And I hear that through my body, basically. So I have a tendency to listen with my body. and not so much with what happens between my ears. And that's something that I've always done. I've always been very sensitive to vibrations and energy and all of these kind of things. And so as I'm listening, I can really hear things that maybe a lot of people miss, and that makes me curious, right? So I'm naturally a very curious person, and so I start asking questions about, hey, where does that come from? What is it? What's happened there? And so it helps them expand their own thinking and their own perspectives in ways that they probably never would have thought of doing. And that very often helps them come to insights and new knowledge about themselves and the situation that they're in. And so I learned that, what I thought previously was a curse is actually a gift. And once I learned how to package that and how to work with that, that became kind of part of my trademark as a coach. And so over the years, I've also been training other coaches how to do the same thing, how to be, much more present and really being able to listen with a whole being, rather than just simply listening to the context of the conversation.
Mhm. Well, one of the things I noticed you left out relates to part of the title of your book on being a horrible boss. So, if we
Yes,
could take a little detour for a minute so my
absolutely.
listeners will understand what your own journey, why you labeled yourself a horrible boss at one point.
Yeah, perfect. And this was, probably it was about what 17 years ago now. So it's a while ago, and it was still in a time where I was still trying to figure myself out. And working in this life of a personal trainer, I had this dream too of being a business owner. And at one point, I actually got to that point where I could find investors and start my own fitness business, and ended up opening one of the largest athletic training centers in Southeast Asia. I was already living in Asia at the time, and I discovered that opening a gym and starting a business, there's a lot that comes with that, with regards to hiring people, being able to put the people in the right place, a lot of business strategy, marketing, you name it. There's so much there. And what I actually discovered for myself was that I was so deeply passionate about the work that I was doing as a trainer. And I really believe that I had kind of cracked the nut in terms of how to develop, kind of super athletes, and coming totally from a place of ego. Really thought that, I was God's gift to trainers. And when I started bringing in staff, I wanted my staff to do things my way, and run, run the club and the gym, according to my vision. And the unfortunate thing about that is that I also had business partners. I had, three other business partners who also invested in the business. And not once did I listen. Did I, follow their ideas or perspectives. I was very, very fixed in my way of how I wanted to do things. And what I later learned about that was that, I was simply driven by this strong sense of belief that I knew that what I was talking about. And because I was stuck in what I like to call my own space of knowing, my knowing pillar, so to speak, I didn't expand my kind of ability and my vision to be open to other perspectives and other ideas. And the unfortunate thing was, of course, that the business suffered. And my staff were unhappy because they couldn't do their own things. There was no autonomy in the organization. There was, not even for the partners, right? So that then created an atmosphere, what I like to call the climate. We can talk more about that. But walking into that place was just that. I remember, walking into my own business and standing in the middle of the business going, I don't want to be here. Right. Because it was such a horrible atmosphere.
Mm.
And that really affected me, because I take in a lot of those vibrations, not knowing that I was the one actually creating the weather. And so I walked in and go, I hate it here. And so ended up leaving, ended up selling my shares and say, you know what, I don't like this. This is not for me. And a great learning lesson for me was the moment I left the business did better. And so that was a good slap to the ego, because I discovered that I was my own worst enemy.
Mhm.
And I think this is something that we see a lot in in other leaders as well, especially founders, entrepreneurs, people who are so deeply passionate about their business that they forget to kind of take off the blinders and allow themselves greater perspective and leveraging on the people who are really, really smart and very capable to work with them and to build something that is much, much greater. And I learned that lesson the hard way. And I always tell, kind of my friends and stuff, that it was the most expensive MBA I could ever have done, but it was a really valuable learning lesson, because it's actually what inspired me to want to learn more about leadership,
Mhm.
and kind of triggered me into going into leadership coaching.
You
Without
know,
that experience, I wouldn't be here.
yeah, I think it gives you so much credibility with the leaders you work with, because you're not
Mm.
pretending you had it all right. You have a story to share that is
Yeah.
relatable, and I think that's
Mhm.
very powerful. There are so many different important points you make in your book, and
Mhm.
you have a real, to me, gift and strength in coming up with these different models and
Mhm.
then giving examples and telling stories that just really bring them to life. So the first one I want to start with is what you've already referenced, the weather, because you
Mhm.
talk about when you walk into an organization, you're assessing, and you call it, the culture, but you refer to it as the weather. So talk about the
Climate. Yeah.
three aspects of weather and what those translate into as far as a culture.
Yeah, so we spend so much time. I mean, companies do culture surveys, and they spend so much time really trying to quantify, right? Where is the state of the culture of the organization? That's all great stuff, but really, at the end of the day, just like when I walked into my own company and kind of felt the weather and went, man, this is not good. We can do the same, and we all have this ability to sense our environment, right? It's not something that we necessarily have to learn. It's just simply being able to take in our environment in a moment, to just stand still and just allow ourselves to absorb that energy. And just from the many experiences that I have, not just creating my own climate in the organization, but also just working with so many other leaders, I like to group them into kind of three different types of climates that we feel when we walk into any company, really. I mean, even a restaurant. You walk into a restaurant, you can feel it right away. You know of that restaurant, whether things are actually running properly, or whether they're not, just simply from that energy that you're actually feeling. And what those three climates really are is number one is the sun shining, right? Is it one of those beautiful sunny days where everybody's kind of walking with a little bit of a bounce in their stride, and everybody's smiling and they're relaxed and they're having a good time, like almost like they're at the beach, and is that the atmosphere that you're able to take in? Of course, the second one is where things get a little bit overcast, right? It's like the weather's getting a little bit gloomy. Try walking outside with very gray clouds outside, and be equally excited and be equally enthusiastic, just as you are when it's a fantastic day, right? When it's beautiful weather. It's difficult to do that, because that's the energy that we're actually receiving. It's a different type of energy. And so we have the same thing as we walk into our company. Is it overcast? Is it gray, or is the sun shining? And of course, the last one is storming, right? Is it raining? Is it miserable? And when we walk outside and it's raining and it's miserable, we don't have the tendency to want to go to the beach and say, hey guys, let's have a party on the beach. And instead, we want to go in hiding, right? We want to hide from the rain because it's cold and uncomfortable and it's wet. And we feel the same thing when we walk into our workspace, and simply through observation, we can really kind of put the finger on the spot and kind of say, hey, where are we right now with regards to that culture? It's I remember having this wonderful conversation many years ago with a leader who did the same thing, and he said something to me. He says, when I don't hear laughter in the hallways, I know something's wrong. And I thought that was a real great little
Mm,
pointer, right? It's like if your people aren't having a good time, even if they're working really hard and they're just not having a good time, something's not right. And that's when, as a leader, you want to take notice and you want to say, hey, something might be up here. Let's investigate.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a simple metaphor to use
Mhm.
for someone to pay attention to that energy. One of the
Mhm.
other things that you brought out that I really like is this idea of the three pillars of wisdom.
Mhm.
So you mentioned one of them earlier. So talk about what the three of them are and what does that look like?
Yeah, and this is something that I learned from, just many years of practicing martial arts and, working with some wonderful, martial arts masters, especially the grand masters out there who have been dedicated their entire lives to this art form, right? And what I always was deeply moved by is when you take somebody who has reached such a deep level of mastery, they tend to kind of appear with this aura, right, of wisdom. And I've always been intrigued by that, right? What is it that really kind of helps us access that wisdom? And if I think back to all of the people that I would consider really wise, as it comes down to three things. The first one is what I like to call the knowing pillar of those three pillars, and that's simply the stuff that we know, right? Kind of from our experiences in our lives and what we've learned and all of that kind of that knowledge that we've accumulated over a certain amount of time, right? That becomes a very important pillar. The second one is the feeling pillar, right? That's really about our emotions, being connected with, kind of, a good analogy is, if knowing is in the head, then the feeling part is in the heart, right? So the head and the heart combination. And the third one is the sensing pillar. That's what's in the gut. And when we're able to put all three of those together, right? Knowing, feeling, and sensing, head, heart, and gut. That's when we use our whole being as a way of taking in information and being able to assimilate what we think, what we feel, what we sense in a way that helps us move in a direction maybe that we had not considered before. And something that I find really interesting is the analogy of, for example, a manager versus a leader. And something that I've found in my experience is that when we take really exceptional leaders, they operate with a different, I guess, priority than the average manager would do. So most managers, most people are hired into roles for the most part because they're really strong in the knowing pillar, right? Organizations are driven by data. And so we need people in organizations who manage that data and managing processes and all of these kind of things. And so that knowing pillar becomes really important for them. And then, of course, the feeling and the sensing pillars, not so much, because it's very difficult to quantify what you're feeling and what you're sensing. And so they might use some of that feeling and sensing, but it's mostly used to kind of say, hey, how do I feel about this data? How do I feel about this information? And does it seem right for me? And if it seems like the right thing to do, then they'll do it, right? As where leaders have a tendency to operate in a different order. They tend to operate more in that sensing, feeling, and knowing space. So for them, knowing the data, knowing the nitty gritty of things is not so important, right? So for them, they need to be able to walk into a meeting, really being able to sense the room and to be able to really sense, where is this business going? what's actually really happening from the space. And so that's where vision comes from. That's where creativity comes from, all of those kind of things. And so for them, it's leading with the gut first. And then how do I feel about what I'm sensing? Do I feel excited? Do I feel not excited? Am I scared? Am I, and having that level of emotional intelligence that's why it's so important for leaders to have that, is because that connects them to that feeling pillar. And then they might then look at some of that data and say, how does the data support what I'm actually feeling here? And that transition between kind of from a manager to a leader is something that can be very challenging for many leaders, especially many aspiring leaders, people who want to grow into, C-suite levels and all of these kind of things, is where do they learn to make that transition? Where do they learn to trust their guts and their hearts, right? Who's teaching them this? And because organizations tend to promote people who were previous, in the previous role, were really good at what they did, meaning that they were very good in that knowing pillar, it can be a really big struggle for a lot of leaders to transition into that kind of more senior leadership space. And so, if you're an aspiring leader, or you're aspiring to become a better leader or more efficient leader, then this is something to look for, right? To kind of say, hey, where am I on these three pillars? What, am I really maybe too reliant still on this kind of knowing pillar, where I like to get stuck into my details and like to know the nitty gritty of things? Or am I willing to let that go? Am I willing to just give permission to, the other people that I've hired to take care of that? And instead, I'm going to sit more in that feeling and sensing space, so I can really kind of get an idea of where my team is going, or where this division of the organization is going, etc. And that's such an important skill for people to learn. And that's what I find really triggers in ourselves our wisdom, because that pulls everything together for us to then really be able to assimilate everything that we're knowing, feeling, and sensing, and then being able to make decisions based on that.
Yes, it's so clear, those three. And I remember in the book you were telling this story about working with executives who
Mhm.
tended to focus on that knowledge piece. And
Mhm.
you shared a story with them from your high school experience around
Mhm.
losing. And I just loved that story. It was actually, I thought, quite profound. And I would love for you to share that briefly to
Sure.
illustrate what how that applied to this whole knowing piece and helping those executives sort of make that mental transition that you were just
Yep.
talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So when I was in high school, I was one of the greatest gifts that my mom gave me, and unfortunately she passed away a few weeks ago. But one of the greatest gifts that she gave to me is that she introduced me to martial arts at the age of 5. And this this was like when Bruce Lee was still alive. So it was a long time ago. There were no kids classes in martial arts. As a 5-year-old, I was training in men's classes, and she put me in martial arts because she believed that every one of us kids had to grow up like warriors, because she was this she basically, she was, we were all living in political exile, because she was a warrior herself, and she was fighting the South African government's white supremacist regime at that time. And so she was actually one of 3 white women who was jailed for her political beliefs and her political activities. And so as a kid, my life was already very different. And so she always felt firmly like, hey, you guys need to, you need to be able to stand up for yourselves. You need to be this. So I'm going to throw you guys into martial arts. And of course, here we are as kids. And that was a very, interesting experience, but I loved it. And just absolutely fell in love with martial arts. And it's something that I've always continued to practice. I've done many different martial arts. I love to explore different martial arts. And I remember when I was in high school, I was studying karate. And as I was, kind of growing, right, I noticed that I had a talent for martial arts. I was pretty good at it. until I actually started kind of evolving as a martial artist. And of course, there were competitions where you had to, fight against other fighters and all of that kind of stuff. And as I grew, it's when I first started, it was pretty easy to win matches. And so I would grow in these kind of like provincial to then, kind of national type level, fights, right? That we would be in. And that's when I started to discover that things got harder. I wasn't winning easily anymore, and I actually got to a point where I started losing a lot, and became very frustrated because because I was always focusing on the win, and I wanted to, so the way that I would manage that is by training harder. Right. So I would, study more, train harder, and do all of this kind of stuff. But I just continued losing more. And one day I remember going to my teacher and asking my teacher, I said, I don't know what's wrong. Right. It's like whatever, everything that I'm doing, I seem to be doing all the right stuff, but I keep losing. And he just looked at me and he just kind of said, Marcel, before you can learn how to win, you first have to learn how to lose. And of course, being 16 years old, I was like, wait, what does that mean? Right? Being say all I wanted to do was win. And of course, the important thing of this was, the ability to take our losses and be able to see them through a different lens and learn and grow from them. And being able to ask ourselves that question of what am I missing? Right? What am I not seeing? What part of, because for me, I would basically respond by doing the same stuff over and over again, just do more of it. Where in reality, there were certain things in my development as a martial artist that I was missing, that I wasn't seeing. And I had to learn how to look differently at my training. And it was once I started to embrace losing as an opportunity to learn more about myself and to be able to figure out how to go about that, that's when all of a sudden the whole world for me opened up. And I think that is just such an important thing in business as well, is that we have a tendency to be so afraid of making mistakes and so-called losing, right? Because God forbid, right? It's we announce ourselves as a loser, but the truth is there's so much learning, there's so much growth, and so much wisdom to attain from our losses that over time, when utilized properly, it can really help us evolve as a winning athlete or a winning organization in the future.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great story. One of the other models that you introduced that I really liked was WISE. You have acronyms. So this one is WISE. So just briefly explain each of those, because I want to go deeper with one of them.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's the and it's, again, it's how my brain works. I love things that are simple. I don't like things that are complicated, and so I try to dumb things down as much as possible, more so for my own understanding and for my own brain to process. And I found that things like models and acronyms work really well for me. And so part of this life experience for me was really kind of understanding how do you access wisdom, right? Or how do you even manifest it, right? What are the steps that we really need to undertake? And of course, that WISE happens to be a great acronym for that. And the first question that we need to ask, and that was the same, in the example that I just used with my martial arts, is what am I not seeing, right? What am I blind to? And that's such a powerful question, and it's a question that I actually ask many of my clients for when we were coaching, and when they're telling me about a situation, a question they're well is, what are you not seeing? And because we have limited vision as human beings, there's a 360 view around us that we might not necessarily be open to. And so it's looking for those blind spots, right? It's trying to find out, what am I not seeing? And therefore being able to utilize the resources and the people around us to really be able to, kind of make sure that we can see as much of the picture as we can, in order for us to really be able to fully understand where we are and what we need to do. And it's something that I see, many people forgetting, right? They stick to that knowing pillar, right? And that knowing pillar puts the blinders on. And one of the challenges with just living in that knowing pillar is that we then start to believe, right, that what we're thinking is the truth, is fact. And when our beliefs become facts, and we see this in many aspects of the world, and we see it in world politics, we see it in so many different areas, is that when we choose to live with those blinders on, we become limited in our capacity to see the big picture. And the same thing happened to me when I was running my gym, as well as it's happened to me in many occasions in my life as well. And it's that ability to take those blinders off and say, hey, let's look at kind of a broader area here, and let's try and find my blind spots, because there are always blind spots. There's always something that I can't see. And so that's that first letter. The second one is really around inviting curiosity, right? It's about allowing yourself to become curious about what you're not seeing, and trying to access that creativity within you. Then the third one, of course, is and one of them that I think is the most profound, is surrendering to our most unlikely teachers. And what I mean with that is that when we ask people for advice, and when we ask people for feedback, we have a tendency to kind of pick and choose the people that we are most comfortable with. And very often those are people who have similar views as we do, right? As where if we really want to be able to explore our blind spots and be curious about it, we have to have the courage to be able to surrender to the teachings of people who see a very different viewpoint than we do. Imagine world politics if we had that opportunity to do so as a human race, is to be able to just simply surrender to the teachings of people, even though we might completely disagree with them. But to be able to say, hey, there is a certain amount of wisdom within what you are saying that I can learn from, right? And that I can become better of. And so that becomes a very important step. So always seeking out those opinions from people you would normally not ask, an opinion of. A great example is the story of JFK. When in his whole putting a man on the moon mission, in the 1960s, is where one day he actually got inspiration from his janitor. Because he was, it was a long night, things weren't moving. He only had 9 years to, get somebody on the moon, and, getting funding and all of this kind of stuff. It wasn't as easy as, people might remember. And one day he was kind of thinking about, maybe this, is not going to work. Maybe I won't get there. And, and he finished work at like 11 o'clock at night, and he closes the door of the Oval Office and, kind of walks out in the hallway, and there are two janitors polishing the floor at 11 o'clock at night. And these kind of guys, he's like, what are you doing? And they look up at him and they say, sir, we're putting a man on the moon, sir. And it was kind of dumbfounded by that, because he understood that what he was trying to accomplish, that even people to a janitor's level really understood the role they played in helping put a man on the moon by simply keeping the place as clean as possible. And, and that was such an inspiring piece. And at that moment in time, he allowed himself to be a follower rather than a leader, and be inspired by, his janitors. And so, for an organizational leader, the same thing counts, right? Who are we allowing ourselves to be inspired by, right? Who are we, giving permission to be our teachers? Are we really going out onto the floor and, for example, asking a janitor for advice on how we want to run the company? And that's that very important component of surrendering to our most unlikely teachers. And of course, the last one is the ability to embrace uncertainty with enthusiasm, right? As we step into uncertain times, as we always are, is to be able to do that with a level of enthusiasm and energy that triggers a mood and a emotion of possibility. right? As we can always, see our futures from a glass half empty or a glass half full. And I think for every one of us, if we really want to be able to access as much wisdom as we can, we have to be able to look into the darkness with that sense of inspiration and excitement, rather than with doom and gloom. Because the moment we start seeing our futures from a lens of fear, again, those blinders go on, our bodies contract, we stop existing as the human being that we can potentially be. And that's something that we have to consciously override in order for ourselves to be able to move forward. And so those are the four pillars, what WISE, that really help people, kind of be able to expand themselves as leaders, to be able to apply themselves as wise as possible.
Those are all so great. And I'm just going to summarize that one piece so that we can move on to talking about energy, because that's a core piece of your book. The experience that your friend Margie shared as she worked at this airport, and she had the responsibility one time to escort the Dalai Lama from the plane over to his transportation, something that would normally have taken 30 minutes. It took her, I forget how long now, but quite a long time just to get him off the plane, and then another couple of hours to get over to the transportation. And the reason was that he was curious. He was, that second, inviting curiosity, really seeking out to know the people he encountered along the way, not in a superficial way, but he really connected with them. And I thought that was quite profound, because we all have those opportunities to be curious about those. And to me, your wise pieces all run together, because sometimes we make judgments about who we're going to be curious with, when in fact, everyone we encounter has something to offer us that we can learn from.
Exactly.
So that was just a great story. And as people hopefully will get the book and read it, I think they'll find it very profound. He had what you called insatiable curiosity.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
let's pause here and or make a shift, because I really want to give adequate time to talk about energy. This is not something that, really people focus on that much. And I love that you've already alluded to it in terms of picking up the vibration or picking up the energy. We all do this. And before we get into the details of the 5 different kinds of energies that you discuss in your book, give us your definition of energy, what you mean by that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I wrote this in the book as well. As there's the Western concept, right, of energy, with Western science, with understanding kind of atoms and how they all interact, and all of that kind of stuff. But then there's also the Eastern philosophy of energy, especially coming from Indian philosophies, as well as Chinese, where they talk about energy in a different way. And of course, being a martial artist, I was very attracted. I've learned both philosophies, and I was, of course, very attracted to how can we combine both that Eastern as well as that Western, Western science philosophy, and put those together to be able to create something tangible that we can work with. And so for me, the definition of energy is vibration, right? Is understanding how we interact with our environments, but also how our environment interacts with us, simply by the interplay of energy that's happening, at that moment in time. And when I'm saying environment, that environment can be expanded up into space, right? So energy is not limited by distance or by time or anything like that. And so as human beings, we vibrate this energy, right? All of the cells in our bodies vibrate, and if you look at them through a microscope, you'll see that all of these cells are, consist of atoms that are vibrating around, and they're going crazy. And when these all of these cells, when they are all vibrating in the same tune, as I like to call it, that creates a certain aura. right? That's what they talk about in kind of Asian philosophies as what our aura is. It's really the interplay of all of our trillions of cells. And what's interesting, of course, is that, for example, if we if we become diseased, right, or even if we have a common cold, we have blood pressure, whatever it is, it actually changes how the cells in our body interplay with each other, and that therefore changes the tune that we vibrate. So if I'm a leader and I'm stressed, for example, or I'm concerned, I'm worried about something, it's actually going to change how my body vibrates. And as human beings, or actually all beings on this planet, how we interact with each other is through this energy first. So when we are, for example, even having a communication, we first interact based on this energy transfer between two bodies. And as many leaders, I'm sure they've all heard the term of like, hey, this person brings great energy into the room. For example, a person, I like to call it an energy donor, right? There are people who just ooze of this energy and this positivity, and they fill the room with this energy that people go, wow, that's electrifying. But they can't really put their fingers on what is actually causing that. On the other hand, there are also people who are energy vampires who do exactly the opposite, right? Who kind of walk into the room and they just suck the life force out of the room. And so there is this interplay of energy that allows us to either be an energy donor or an energy vampire. And I've always found that really fascinating. And so for me, as I've been working with it over the last couple of decades, is to come up with some form of tangible model that really the average Western brain understands, right? And including for myself. And again, about simplicity. And what I discovered through the research that I was doing and all of that kind of stuff is that there are really five different energies, and we project any one of these energies at any given moment, right? So we all have these five energies, and they're really just based on, they depend on our moods, they depend on how we feel that day in terms of our how healthy we are, our fitness levels, all of those kind of things really dictate the type of energy that we can be projecting. And so we have a tendency to live in a dominant type of energy. And when we're in a leadership position, that energy would probably appeal to about 20% of the population, because everybody else is in a different energy, right? And so what that means is that if we are not consciously aware of the type of energy that we're projecting, we're really only appealing to a small percentage of the people in our environment, meaning that there are people out there who are not connecting with us, who are not feeling us in that interplay type space. No matter how much we tell ourselves how great we might be as a leader, I can guarantee every single listener here if you are in some form of leadership or management role where you're managing people, there is somebody out there who thinks you are a horrible boss, simply because you're not aware of the type of energy that you're projecting. No matter how hard you try to be a great boss, no matter all of these kind of things, it's almost impossible to please everybody out there on the planet. So somebody out there is going to be walking around saying, no, I'm not feeling this person, right? I'm not feeling this leader. And so what is most important about this is really understanding not so much what our default energy really is and what energy we live in, but actually understanding the ability to consciously project a certain energy, right? To kind of be aware of what that actually energy is. And that comes with a level of mindfulness. And that's why mindful leadership is so important, because it takes that level of self-awareness to say, hey, what kind of energy am I bringing into the room? And is this energy serving me? Right. And so that's the important question that we always want to be asking ourselves. What am I bringing into the room? And is this energy serving me? And if it isn't, then the third question would be, which energy would serve me or would serve the organization, right? In this case. And so what I've done is I've created a model around those five energies, and I've given them very Western names, even though they do have, like in Chinese, they're actually Chinese names around these energies, but I've just made them very, very Western so we all understand them in plain English. And so what those energies are, I want you to think about a compass, a north, south, east, west type compass, where there's an east-west axis and a north-south axis. And the east-west axis is a forward-moving or retreating axis. So what I mean with that is that, let's say, if to the west would be forward-moving energy, I like to call that determined energy. So that's when we're in a state of determination, when we're focusing on moving forward, when we're focusing on getting the job done, when we're focusing on tasks, for example, and all of this kind of, but when we're also focused on mobilizing people, all of those kinds of things, that tends to come from a level of determination, and it's what I like to call determined energy. And in martial arts, we learn how to push that energy out to forcefully to create more force. And we all do that in our own interactions and in life. On the opposite end of that spectrum is what I like to call inviting energy, and that's really the retreating, the pulling in of energy, the ability to absorb energy, the ability to absorb perspectives and ideas, and different perspectives, different ways of operating, all of those kind of things come from that inviting energy that we have. That's also a place where empathy lives, for example, our ability to connect with a person at an emotional level. And those tend to work like opposites. So there's that pushing energy, and then there's a retreating energy. And of course, in Tai Chi, we use that, and we call that yin and yang. So in yin and yang is that flow of energy, we're either forward or actually moving. So it's a very horizontal type flow of energy when we're using that in interaction with other human beings. And then, of course, we have that north-south axis, and that north-south axis is inspired from prana, from the energy in especially in Ayurvedic medicine, and it comes down to the chakras. And if you look at the 7 main chakras, they work in a vertical line, and so the north-south axis is at north is what I like to call light energy. So that's pointing at the sky. That's kind of like, where we live in lightness. That's where we have fun and we're joyful and we're spontaneous and carefree and all of those kind of things. And we literally, when we live in that level of lightness, we feel different. We operate different. We carry ourselves differently. You can even see in somebody's gait when they're walking whether or not they're in light energy, because they're a lot more bouncy, for example, than somebody who is the opposite, which is really heavy energy. And heavy energy, of course, is being really serious, right? It's about like, oh, this is very important, and we have to do the right thing, and we have to follow procedure. And it's where light energy is a place of carefreeness, is also a place of exploration, is a place of curiosity, for example, as where heaviness is then the opposite, is really about kind of avoiding failure. There's a fear element that comes into living in a state of heaviness, right? But that's really where we are grounded into the earth, and our feet become like roots in the earth. And it's also a place where we can't be pushed around. It's also a place of discipline, for example, all of these kind of things. So those are the 4 main outskirts of energy. And of course, then there's a 5th one that I've left out so far, and that's the one that's right in the middle, where those 2 axes interact, and it's called neutral energy. And neutral is a space of mindfulness. It's just a space of being without necessarily having to float in any one of those directions, and just to be there. And what I teach my leaders is the ability to operate from a place of neutrality, and then be able to consciously choose which energy they need to flow into to be able to, do they need to be in a space of lightness, right, where they have to have fun with people and engage people and all of that kind of stuff, or do they need to be in a place of determination where it's like, hey guys, we need to get this job done and this needs to happen, and that ability to be able to flow with that energy. But then immediately also, once they're done, to be able to pull back into neutral, so that they can always be in that middle point, and therefore consciously choose which energy they're going to go into at any given moment. And that's why that level of mindfulness and self-awareness is so important.
Mm-hmm. Those are all so important. And I want to, because we're really at time, I want to really encourage my listeners to get a copy of your book, because I have found, since reading it and really absorbing those 5 different aspects of energy, that I notice my own more. and also
Mm-hmm.
notice the people around me more. And that
Beautiful.
whole idea of making that shift
Mm-hmm.
consciously to match or at least not compete or
Mm-hmm.
contrast with them so that we get in sync more quickly. I
Yep.
just think it's so valuable, and it's so different than thinking about a personality type and
Mm-hmm.
stretching out of your comfort zone. It's
Exactly.
operating at not that knowing level, going back to the three pillars, but
Mm-hmm.
really the sensing of,
Exactly.
what's happening here, and then
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that and allowing yourself to feel it, and then, you know, connecting all of that together. Because the goal, of course, is having an enhanced relationship where
Mm-hmm.
we are as efficient and effective as possible in our communication, in our relationship, so we achieve whatever it is we're trying to do, whether it's work related or personal, because this works well in both situations. So,
Mm-hmm.
Marcel, you have shared so many valuable insights with my listeners today. I want to thank you so much
You're
for
most
being
welcome.
who you are and how you've integrated all these things, and for the models that you've put together. It's
Mm-hmm.
really a gift to the world. And so
Oh,
I would
thank
love
you.
for you to tell folks, how can they get a copy of your book? And I didn't even mention your other one, so please mention both of them, how they can get the books, how they can connect with you and learn more about your services.
Absolutely. So my first book is called Headstrong Performance, and that's actually, coming at from a background of neuroscience, is how do leaders protect their brains, while working under pressure, and that was what my research was on when I was studying neuroscience. So a very important book if you are in that leadership space and you're concerned about protecting not your own brain but also the brains of others. Is there are some really simple and effective techniques for us to be able to do that. And it's all laid out very, very nicely. So kind of with that neuroscience understanding. So if you're a bit of a neuroscience geek like me, it's a great book to read. And of course, then the second book, of course, the horrible bosses. The best way to get in touch with me and actually also to experience the five energies is going to the level5partners.com website. There's actually a free assessment that you can do on the website. So you just fill out the assessment. It's 14 questions. That takes 5 minutes, and it will give you an idea of the default energy that you tend to project in your day, and that will kind of open up some awareness in that space. And so it's level5partners.com, and five is written like a Roman numeral, so V. So it's levelvpartners.com, and go to the free assessment, take that, and of course on there you can find more information about the books. There's also a blended learning approach. There is an online course learning the five energies mastery that you can also sign up for and do. It takes about a month to really fully master the five energies and how to be able to use them to not only shift your own energy but also help you shift the energy of others, so that you really can come into that space where you can both walk out of a collaboration as winners and creating that opportunity for yourself. So that would be the best way. Of course, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always available if you have any questions. Amazon, of course, has my books as well. Bookstores, if you walk into a bookstore and you can ask for the book. So there are many different ways in which you can connect with me, and feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me through the website. My email is Marcel at levelvpartners.com. So very straightforward. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to engage and if you have any questions or anything like that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marcel. And for
You're most
folks that
welcome.
are listening to this, Marcel's last name, Daane, is spelled Daane.
Very
So
good.
thank you again, Marcel,
Thank
and
you.
continue doing the important work that you're doing. The world needs you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me too. It was so nice of you. It's even though it was 4 o'clock in the morning here for me because I'm in Singapore. It's the best way to wake up. So you've brought such amazing energy yourself. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our two books, Connect with Your Team and peer coaching made simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.